This is the final update to my Shockburst Witchhunter Mercenary. I'm level 89. I hit T15 maps a few days ago with the same gear that I did my T10s on. I'll hover over that real quick for you. You can have a quick look if you want to pause on any piece. My defenses look much better since they made those changes to the resistances in that last patch. Now, capped elemental res, still uncapped chaos res, still about 10k armor. With the final version of the skill tree, I'd probably hit about 15k armor and about 2.6, 2.7k HP. And during that time from T10 to T15, I farmed like about 300x, which I didn't reinvest back into the character because I felt like it was good enough at clearing maps and doing what I wanted to do, and I was to save that currency for future build plans. The only modifications I made to the skill tree since my last update was I invested into these two-handed nodes here with Overwhelm. I just have that as a spare point for now. That's not necessary. And I also unallocated the points into Polymathy and Jack of all trades and that cluster there, and pathed over to get split shot forking projectiles for that 100% chance for an additional projectile when forking for clear speed with Galvanic Shards. Other than that, the skill tree is nearly identical from the last update. I now have 5 sockets for Shockburst rounds as well. And just to go over the skills and the skill gems again, for Galvanic Shards, I'm running Fork, Martial Tempo, Lightning Infusion, Conduction. Shockburst rounds, I'm running Primal Armament, Elemental Focus, Fresh Clip, and Concentrated Effect. Everything else is the same, except now I popped in Emergency Reload with Ingenuity and Premeditation. This is because after doing a few skill point investment into the boss tree, bosses are getting a bit tankier. So with Shockburst rounds, when you're unloading into them and you hit that empty clip, you can do quick reload and you can shoot again with empowered shots, and you can see that the pulse is at like nearly 72, 73k, 72k DPS, and it absolutely melts the bosses. And you get that quick reload. Actually, yeah, so sorry, what emergency reload does is the buff empowers loaded bolts with 29% more damage, and pre-med is another 15 on top of that, and that's just a cooldown reduction rate. Clearing maps with this build is fantastic. You move really, really quick and you have pretty great AoE, and it's so satisfying to play, especially with those Witchhunter explosions. Galvanic Shards being the main staple for dealing with those white mobs and magic monsters and even some rares. And for a particular tanky rare in the bosses, you got Shockburst rounds and Stormcaller Arrow and Voltaic Mark to shock them up and to shoot them down. You don't have to be mega geared to clear T15s either. Mob health doesn't actually scale that high, it feels like. You could probably clear T15s pretty easily with like a 1 to 10 exalt investment into each piece of gear. And honestly, what more gear allows you to do, what it feels like for me at least, is allow you to play a bit more recklessly, because you have a bit more defensives and you can clear a bit faster that way. So yeah, you could 100% be doing it on a budget. You just be a bit more careful, even with 4 sockets in each of the gems. Defensively for maps, it feels pretty good too, but I do wish it were a little bit tankier. For mapping at least, most mobs die way too fast to hit you. But on lower density maps, it can feel a little bit awkward because you're not triggering those explosions. The AoE definitely feels strongest when the density is high. And honestly, I actually find the location of the map to be the most difficult thing, as opposed to even like how loaded your waystone is. So for me, a Maya with a relatively mid waystone, I'd feel like would be more difficult than a crypt map with like an absolutely loaded waystone. Bosses you do have to be careful of. You can survive most hits once, but you can die if you get comboed or do a big misplay. There are also some rare mob combinations that can be a little deadly. The main one that jumps out to me is if you get like a dual rare spawn on like a fast mob type, and they've got that circle that drains life and mana. Now, if that happens and you don't get the jump on them and don't shock them first with your Stormcaller Arrow, which would allow you to then mow them down with your Stormblast bolts, they just drain your mana and you can't cast any spells, you can't reload, and they can hunt you down. It's not super common. I've run into it like I think like 3 or 4 times. It's actually killed me once. I'm just running around helpless with no flasks and no mana, unable to do anything. When it comes to top end pinnacle content, and as much as I'd like to say it could smash it because the damage is 100% there to do it, I think the build is a little bit too squishy to recommend. Like, it could do it. I'm not saying it's impossible. I just have to acknowledge that there are better builds out there. 99% of players don't get to the pinnacle content anyways, and I haven't on this character. It is a big investment. But if you did want to do it, this build I'm pretty sure could do it. But the change I'd recommend making is actually going with Gemling Legionnaire, because as you get into the higher levels, you could actually scale your life and tankiness a lot better. And this is mainly because Witchhunter just feels too squishy. You're kind of forced to go an armor life build without that good of a way to scale up life to a safe amount where you could feel you could take on that content without too big a risk of getting one shot. With that being said, the defensive ascendancy points actually feel like you're griefing yourself. Maybe I just don't know the right way to get it to work, but with obsessive rituals granting sorcery ward for 50% less armor and evasion, it does not feel worth it. Having half armor and evasion makes it, for me at least, feel like you take way too much physical damage for a shield that only blocks elemental damage. I personally think it has to be changed in some way or buffed in some way, unless I'm missing something crucial to make it work. But even with that being said, it should work on its own as an ascendancy point with external help, and it really just doesn't feel like it's worth the trade, especially for something as valuable as this point. With that being said, I don't have my 4th ascendancy point on this character, and I'm probably not going to get it. The truth of that is the 4th point options, especially when running these 3, don't feel that good. If you were to have 4, it would be fighting Witchbane with no mercy versus the explosion you get from Zealous Inquisition. Zealous Inquisition feels great, especially for mapping. This combo with the 4th point would probably feel better for bossing. Now, I have a little rant incoming as well about getting the 4th point, but I feel like the trials are not worth it, especially for how unfun they are versus how difficult they are. And from what I've seen, the community for the most part shares this point of view. Like, this build has the damage to melt everything in there, including the bosses. And maybe this is an outcome of having a squishy build in the end game, but you could get really bad RNG and just have your run over like then and there, like with bad luck. Or you could misplay and be punished really hard and your run's over. Or you can have a combination of the two, and your run would also be over. And with the RNG element, it feels like after you fail, there isn't something to be learnt, especially after the time invested, other than just to get luckier. And that, plus with the 4th ascendancy point not being super crucial or game changing, I just haven't like knocked out the time to grind to get the 4th point. Or it's just I need to learn to play and it's a skill gap and build gap and I just need to get better. But yeah, anyways, I'd like to thank you all for watching and subscribe if you want to see what I have next. I've got a few different builds planned next. And honestly, comment below, share your experiences as well. Do you agree with me? Have you found that to be the same? How have your builds been treating you? I'd love to hear it. Thank you all again.